He's the right rev of speed, and he comes on today in a unhappier time, a sadder time, because David Pearson, who won more races than any other driver in the Cup Series except for Richard Petty, passed away yesterday at the age of 83. And really a legendary American sports figure. I want to begin this with talking, and we're discussing this a little bit. Jerry Bonkowski is now joining us here to talk about David Pearson, motorsports writer, NBCSports.com. And Jerry normally joins us on Mondays and Fridays to talk about the NASCAR schedule and the goings-on and such. But wanted to have him on today with the loss of a legend. And I guess where we go on to, where do you rank David Pearson? We were talking about this off the air. If you were going to do that Mount Rushmore of NASCAR, does David Pearson make it along with Richard Petty and certainly two other drivers?
No question about it. I mean, how did you not have him on a Mount Rushmore of NASCAR race when he won 105 NASCAR Cup races, second most, like you said, to Richard Petty? And, he was just a couple of things about Richard. I mean, about David that come to mind, Marky. Number one, and a lot of people don't seem to know this, and he earned 105 wins, essentially being primarily a part-time driver. I mean, today's racers, drivers we talk about, some of them are obviously full-time drivers, but he, I believe he only did something like 9 full-time. Might not even have been that many. And, the majority of other teams were all essentially part-time efforts. Maybe that can happen here, maybe a third of the season there, and that kind of thing. So, and he had the success he had. Now, some people have said in the past, well, he won so many races because he cherry-picked a lot of the races that he was in, because he kind of knew he had a better chance of winning at a certain track or a certain race, and that's why he had so many wins. I don't necessarily buy that argument. I think that, he was great no matter who he drove for. Obviously, he had the legacy with the Wood brothers and things like that. But he would definitely be on my Mount Rushmore, along with Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, and number 4 is always one that always kind of gives me trouble. I really don't know who else makes my number 4, but David Pearson will certainly be among the top 3.
Okay, I guess one of the reasons why, and I had this conversation with Jeff Birchfield on the airwaves about 2 years ago, Jerry Bonkowski, and I kind of eliminated Pearson. Maybe you mentioned the cherry picking, but I know he had 112 poles, but only 105 victories. And you look at the all-time victories list, and most drivers, they've got more victories than poles. And I'm like, well, I mean, what's that? What's 7 fewer pole victories than poles and all this? Tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I'll say this. Back in the day when David Pearson was racing against guys like Richard Petty and all the other greats in the sport, Dale Yarborough among others, he had some of the best equipment there was. And back then, going for the poles, they carry a lot more weight than it does over the last 10 years, if you will. It just, it showed that you were the fastest guy there. You had the fastest car in qualifying, and it oftentimes translated to having the fastest car to win the race as well, too. So, when you have guys like Leonard Wood and Eddie Wood and Glenn Wood, they were just spectacular when it came to preparing a car for the speed they needed for qualifying, and they got every possible horsepower they could get out of there. And of course, it certainly didn't hurt having a guy like David Pearson behind the wheel, because a lot of guys maybe wouldn't have had as much success going for the pole as a guy like Pearson. So, I don't look at him having 112 poles versus 105 wins as a detractor at all. I think many, they certainly compliment what he did with all the trips to victory lane as well.
He had an incredible percentage of races won. I read, and this is where I kind of reversed my thinking yesterday on Pearson and his legacy, and it went up in my mind where I believe he won 18% of the races that he was involved in. And that is very impressive because remember, that was of an era in which you might get 60 cars on a bull ring. I mean, the chances of things that could go wrong in that era were, lengthy. Let's just put it that way. As far as a comparison, Jimmy Johnson has won 13% of his races, I think is what I read. And that's considered to be the premier driver in terms of a legacy, and rightly so for today. And certainly somebody that I think that you could put on your Mount Rushmore of NASCAR drivers. 18%, but I mean, is that a product of the, for lack of a better term, cherry picking?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but you can extrapolate that a little bit further. And how many top fives did he also have? I mean, I think, if I remember right, it was something like 30-some%, I think, of his wins and his top fives were all race started. That's a huge, huge, huge number. And one thing about Pearson is he had the tendency to take a car that wasn't performing as good as it probably could be on any given day, and he wound up turning it around with his talent to make it a better car, and wind up with a better finish, if you will. So, it's something that he just had an innate knack for, an ability, if you will, to just get the best out of the best of that car, but he was certainly part of the best of that car, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think of, and I know that they drove for other makes. I mean, one year Dale Earnhardt drove a Ford, but I have always said Dale Earnhardt was Mr. Chevy. I really think that Richard Petty was Mr. Mopar. I mean, you can talk about the later years when he drove a Pontiac or whatever, but you think of Petty, you think of that Plymouth, Was David Pearson Mr. Blue Oval? I mean, I know there were some Mercuries in there as well, but was he Mr. Ford?
Well, let's put it this way. Ford and Mercury were tied to the hip at that point. So
Sure.
And if he drove a Mercury, he was still part of the Ford family. So, yeah, he was definitely Mr. Ford. And, he paved the way for so many other guys who became so successful in Ford. First guy's name that comes to my mind is Bill Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
Paved the way, So, but I will say this. I wanted to share this story with you about David Pearson that I was doing the research for my book, when it came out in 2010, Trading Paint 101 Great NASCAR Debates. And I was in Martinsville, I think 2006, I believe it was, and I had a chance to get Richard Petty one-on-one, and we started talking about drivers. And I said, well, one of the questions I had in the book was, where would you rank Dale Earnhardt compared to other drivers? And I thought for sure, without any hesitation, that Petty would have named Earnhardt as his, best competitor, and not so much best competitor, but as his, the most successful driver other than himself. And he said, nope, absolutely not. Maybe Pearson was the most toughest driver he'd ever faced, most successful driver he'd ever faced. And he said that, he was just so difficult to beat. And, the fact that Richard Petty, got 200 wins in an era of David Pearson, if Pearson wasn't around as the driver, Petty probably could have had maybe 225, maybe 250 wins instead of 200. So that just tells you the weight and the respect that Richard Petty had for David Pearson. And, one of the things too, Marky, and I don't want to get off track here, but this is something that's really, really, really important that we should probably talk about for a minute or so here. The sad thing about David Pearson's passing is that this brings us additionally one step closer to the passing of all the greats.
Yeah.
We still have, a few drivers still left from that era, and Richard Petty obviously is one of them. But it further shows our mortality as human beings, and the greatest drivers of that era, and arguably among the greatest drivers of all time. We're going to continue to see more and more of them pass away, unfortunately, and I know that's the nature of life, but it's really kind of, to me,
Yeah, you mentioned that, and certainly it becomes. I mean, to so many people, it's boy, my childhood is over. I remember when Frank DeFord, who was a great Baltimore Colts fan, and he did a lot of talking about John Unitas when Unitas passed away, and he said, I feel like my childhood is now. And by this time, DeFord was well into his 60s. I mean, and all that. But there was, oh my goodness, can I really relate to that anymore? For my own self, I've talked about being a kid in 1979, City of Champions year in Pittsburgh and all that. When Willie Stargell passed away, that was it to me. I mean, that was a guy lived at the bottom of our hill, for crying out loud, and all this. I can see that to a NASCAR fan exactly where this great rivalry, David Pearson and Richard Petty, that would be a passing of the era. You know what I'm intrigued by in terms of that rivalry, and it's somebody who's lived in so many different southern states, certainly for the longest time Tennessee, but I also lived in North Carolina and South Carolina, is David Pearson being a South Carolinian and racing against the North Carolinian Richard Petty for all those years. It brings back memories of other great sporting events, like, I don't know, the 71 ACC Tournament Championship game and all that, when the last second bucket put the Gamecocks in the NCAA tournament over the Tar Heels or something like that. I mean, it just, there's that. And you look at some of these stories, and it's just, races that are, yes, before my time, but it becomes fascinating. Wait a minute. You mean that he raced at that old raceway in Columbia in something called the Gamecock 200? What was that? That sounds incredible, And here I wanted Bristol to bring back the Volunteer 500. No, tell me more about the Gamecock 200. So I guess that when these things happen, and a man passes away, you do have a chance then to learn the history a little bit better. What else do you remember about David Pearson? Did you have any individual contact, any individual stories you can tell us about Jerry Bonkowski?
Yeah, I've met him a couple of times. To me, he was, when he was a race car driver, he was 110% business. Wasn't really fiery, but he wasn't very flashy, but he was all business. And, when he retired and, as he got on in years, I met him, I believe, the first time was probably like around maybe 2004, 2005. And that would have been, 13, 14 years ago. So he would have been, coming out of his late 60s, going into his early 70s. And he was just so hospitable. And, I never really considered him one of my heroes, but I certainly had a lot of respect for him as a driver and what he did and what he accomplished. And, he just treated me with so much dignity. He had so much class when he talked to reporters. And, there's a lot, Mark, you've been in this business for a long time, just like I have. And I think I'm sure I speak for you as well when I say this. There are very, very few modern day athletes that can compare in terms of the class, the dignity of guys like a Richard Petty, like a Dale Yarborough. He made you feel not like a reporter or just somebody there getting a soundbite. He made you feel like, hey, you're my new buddy.
Wow.
That's the impression I've always gotten from a lot of these older drivers. You go down the list. Harry Gannon's another one that comes to mind. I had a chance to talk to Harry a couple of years ago, and a phenomenal interview. That's one of the things I miss about a lot of today's drivers. A lot of them, and I'm not going to mention any names, but a lot of them, or at least some of them, I'm not going to say a lot, some of them, far too often have a chip on their shoulder, and they don't want to talk to the media. And, for some of them, I kind of understand it. Like, so that they don't want to speak
There you go. Yeah, like I said, I think that it's a shame that it takes death for me to learn so much about. I mean, I always, knew the number of victories, and by the way, it was 113 polls, not 112, so that sort of thing. But this has all come out, and so a lot of stories. I also think that the modern day NASCAR driver, I think that when I always felt that in the 80s and the 90s, and certainly in the 70s, when the sport was coming up, that oh wait, a reporter wants to talk to me. How wonderful! What great publicity and all this. And now that it's sort of, all right, the sport is established and all that, you don't have that. That's a big problem now I see with baseball, for one thing. And it's another reason why, the old adage, hockey players are the nicest to the media. I think that's another reason why, because, they need this, third defenseman really needs the publicity. That's
Exactly.
And I think that has something to do with it as well. But to be put in the same sentence as Harry Gant, I've heard a lot of nice things about Harry Gant over the years. I think that's all you need to hear about David Pearson. The Silver Fox left us at 83 yesterday and raced until 1986. I did not realize. Began on the circuit in 1960, raced until 1986. You think about that. That's 1 year after the Daytona 500. I mean, it's 1 year removed from running on A1A or 2 years actually, to 1986, which is really a very modern type of era for NASCAR. Certainly, I mean, when he started, the cars really were all stock. And, when he ended, still finishing 10th in Michigan in 86, this had become, the races are on TNN and such. You weren't going to be missing it. You could watch them all the time. So David Pearson passing away yesterday at the age of 83. Jerry Bonkowski, it's always wonderful to talk to you. We'll do it on Friday at 1 to find out who's going to win the Cup Series this year. Tri-City Sports Now, come back. Yeah, I'll tell you about the Predators. I'll also tell you, could sports gambling come to Tennessee? What do you think? Pari-mutuels at BMS? What do you think about that? Well, we'll find out. And that might be a bit much. Tri-City Sports Now.
I found it. He got me a Peloton.